morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Morning. Okay, great. I'm happy to be here today. My name's Margo Warminski. I'm the Preservation Director of Cincinnati Preservation Association, which has an official leadership of 3 people, one of whom is a Hoosier, one is a Michigander, and one is from suburban Cincinnati. So I guess we balance each other out. And I'm happy to be here today. Wonderful first presentation, just loved it, and really delighted to hear somebody bring up Saul Alinsky. That was just great. Anyway, we are here today to talk about community development and related issues, and we have a wonderful panel of 3 people from Cincinnati. Can you introduce yourselves, please?
Sure. I'm Dani Issacsohn.
Hi, I'm Mary DeLaney with Community Matters.
And I'm Pattie Hogan with Hill Saftey CAT.
Okay, wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about the organizations that you're affiliated with?
We're a community-led volunteer group that concentrates on safety and cleanliness and livability in Price Hill.
And Community Matters is a nonprofit organization, and I'll get into the nitty-gritty of what we do here in a minute, but our work is sort of the intersection of social services, community organizing, and community development.
Hi, and I run a company called Cohear, and we do community engagement insights. So really trying to use community organizing to help decision makers in government, in agencies, in big foundations, hospitals, utilities, work with the communities they serve to make better decisions.
Well, thank you. It's good to see have all of you, 3 of you here today. You're taking different aspects of community development. Who'd like to go first? Talk about your work.
I think they wanted us to present, and mine's already up there.
Okay, very good. We'll start with you.
Hi again, and I want to thank Matt and the rest of the people who put this together for inviting me and for having me. So I'm going to try and be brief so we can get to the panel, but I'll just do a little bit about explaining who I am, the work we do, and some of the work we've done in Cincinnati. So again, I run Cohear, been doing it about 3 years. My background is mostly in campaign-style organizing and that type of grassroots engagement, starting in 2012, and basically every year until I started Cohear in 2017. Worked in Cincinnati and different parts of Ohio. I was down in Texas for a couple years, in North Carolina, Virginia, DC. So I've bounced around a little in doing this work. And one of the things I found, and it's a little different than the first presentation in terms of conclusions, but we do have this huge problem in our cities, in our communities, in our country, of people feeling disengaged and either apathetic or frustrated or angry with people in positions of power and influence. And that has an effect on a lot of the other things we see in society in terms of voting rates, but also just people showing up. There's the famous book about We're Bowling Alone. And some of the diagnoses are that it's social media and just the media environment in general, the sort of gotcha culture. I think all of that is real, and I agree with it. But in my work, I spent years trying to get people to vote. And trying to build community around getting people to vote. And what you find when you talk to people in gas stations or on their doorstep or at community events, which I've done about a few thousand times, and I'm sure many of you have had these conversations as well, you ask people, okay, are you planning to vote? Are you planning to register to vote? And the answer is often no. Okay, well, why not? What's the point? It doesn't matter who wins. And particularly in underserved communities or rural communities, a sense of we're going to get screwed no matter what. And for a lot of people, that's sort of the end of the conversation. All right, move on to the next door, the next person. For me, I always asked, well, what can you point to? What is driving that feeling for you? And for the people who could express it, it often wasn't something happening in DC. It wasn't something happening in Austin or Columbus. or Richmond, Virginia. It was something they could point to on their street or in their community or in their neighborhood. It was, hey, have you seen what they built down there? Why would they do that? Or they just tore down 16 houses that have been here since my grandma was born to build this thing we don't need for this company I've never heard of. Or there's too many police in my neighborhood. Or there's not enough police in my neighborhood. Or my kid's been getting bullied at school for months and no one will take my call and no one has done anything about it. Or my basement flooded and the utility keeps blowing me off and saying that they won't cover it. On and on and on. And for me, what was so interesting about that and important was that they weren't just pointing to things happening locally, which we sort of know all politics is local, but that the people who make those decisions on a day-to-day basis are not elected officials. Elected officials have a role to play in funding and zoning and strategic planning, but those are police chiefs, hospital CEOs, utility directors, superintendents. Those are not people who have the same systems in place that elected officials have. For better or for worse, elected officials, A, have to get elected, so they have to campaign. And when they're in office, they have a structure for engaging with their constituents. The example I use in Cincinnati is that it is easier to get a meeting with Senator Rob Portman than it is with the CEO of Christ Hospital. And that's not to pick on Christ Hospital or Senator Portman. It's just that it's part of Senator Portman's job to occasionally meet with constituents. There's a whole system to get to him, or at least to his chief of staff, or at least to a senior person. We don't think about CEOs of hospitals in the same way. And yet they are at the root of a lot of that civic disaffection that we're trying to get at and that we're trying to turn around. And so that is why I started Cohear, is to try and change the way that those decision makers in those unelected positions engage with, listen to, and learn from the communities they are in. Because, as we've talked about, it's not that easy to get to them. Residents are pretty disconnected from them. I know from just seeing the hands earlier, everyone in this room has been to community council meetings or neighborhood meetings or association meetings. And you know that A, it's very often the same faces in the room, and B, when decision makers do show up, you're not usually having a productive, forward-thinking, back and forth exchange of ideas. Either there's 60 people who go to the microphone for 90 seconds each, or you got a 15-minute presentation, a 2-minute Q&A, and then it's the next, it goes from fire to police to sewers, but you're not actually exchanging ideas. And so there's no real opportunity for the decision maker to really get into it and hear from the people who are most impacted by their decisions. So our work is based on the idea that living an issue every day makes you an expert on that issue. We call them everyday experts. And that if decision makers and policymakers are going to make effective, good decisions, they have to have a way to have productive, meaningful, forward-thinking conversations with those everyday experts. And so that is what we are set up to do. And I'll talk a little bit about just how we do it, but that is our mission. And the hope is that ultimately we can change the culture of how decisions are made. That if you are trying to make a decision about how to prevent or respond to bullying in schools, or you want to do better about developing a lead service line replacement program as the water department, or you want to figure out how to, what development to build, it should be second nature to say, before we do any of this, before we make any of these decisions, let's talk to some of the end users, the customers, however you want to call them, that are most affected by this. And let's see what their ideas are. Let's see around corners we couldn't see around. And so ultimately our mission is to change that culture of decision making. So just briefly, in terms of how we do it, we use the model I sort of am most familiar with from community organizing and campaigns. Initially on campaigns it was called the neighborhood team model. But it's based on this idea that if you want to get people to show up who are not already showing up, who are not already empowered to be there, who are from underserved communities, who are the people who have the most sort of disconnection or apathy, a few things have to happen. One, they have to be invited personally and actively, so not a flyer, not a Facebook post, not a message left on their answering machine. And two, that personal active invitation has to come from someone they know and they trust already. Has to be based on a relationship. And all of this is sort of intuitive, but I'm sure all of you have sat in rooms and thought well, why didn't anyone show up to this? Why is this meeting empty? How do we get more people to come? I put out 1,000 flyers. I've been posting on Facebook for months. Or even I called a ton of people or I sent all these text messages. So we have found that in our work, that's how, the way you get people to show up is personal active invitations from someone they know and they trust. So for us as organizers, if we're doing essentially different community focus groups each night on different topics and we want a range of people for each one, I am never going to have enough personal relationships where I can invite 12 people I know who've had that experience who are everyday experts on that issue every day. Instead, I take a step back and say, okay, I'm going to build a network of people who themselves have different personal relationships and different networks and trust in different communities. And so we ask them to opt in, we build relationships with them, and they're exactly who you think they would be. They're everyone in this room, they're pastors, they're coaches, they're active neighbors, teachers, social workers, and we call them bridge builders. And so for us, they create a profile, they let us know who they care, what communities they care about, what issues they're active in. And every time we organize a conversation, I was just telling Mary, we had one last week. We're doing a project with, our second project with the superintendent's office in the school district in Cincinnati. So we reached out and we said to our Bridge Builder Network, hey, we have a really cool opportunity for kids who are in neighborhood schools that are underperforming to meet directly with senior administrator in the district to talk about what a good school is for them. Do you know any kids who go to these schools who you think should have a seat at that table, who you want to invite? And so, and that sort of comes to the other premise of our work, which is that we don't go out and get information and report back to the decision maker. For all of the work we do, the decision maker, the CEO, the executive director, the chief communications officer, is in the room talking directly and having a productive conversation with the everyday experts. So that's the president of Duke Energy sitting and talking to people who've struggled to pay their energy bills. It's the superintendent talking to kids who have done self-harm because of bullying, about what to do about that. So that is and for us, that's what's going to ultimately change this culture. It has to be face-to-face, because nothing is as impactful as hearing it directly from someone who's experienced it. A report cannot replace that. A stat cannot replace that. It can supplement it. It can add value to it. But fundamentally, you got to be there. You got to see it to believe it, basically. And so that's a core premise of our work. It is also ultimately what is so empowering for the participants. Because if you are that 11-year-old student, or you're that person who's felt ignored by the utility, or you're someone who's had your basement flood, or you've had a negative interaction with the police, to get to spend an hour and a half or 2 hours in the evening having a real productive conversation with 11 other people, eating some pizza with the police chief or the superintendent of schools or the president of Duke Energy or the CEO of the bus system makes a real difference in how you perceive institutions, the trust you have, the recognition that there are good people trying really hard in these difficult jobs, and that they actually want to hear from you. And so that is a big part of how we're trying to change the culture of decision-making in Cincinnati. Just briefly, some of the institutions and organizations we've worked with, and I'm happy to talk sort of a little bit more maybe in the panel about what these projects have actually looked like. But it's mostly been, as you can see, sort of the big institutions that really play a huge anchor role in their neighborhoods or in the city. So places like the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, Mercy Health, which is a major health system in Cincinnati. We've helped Cincinnati Public Schools on a number of different projects, engaging with their parents and their students. We work very closely with the president of Duke Energy, Ohio and Kentucky. We've developed a customer insights committee for her. We've developed a bus rider advisory board consisting of a range of bus riders for the new CEO of Metro. And he has, it's been unbelievable. And part of this is personality. But he has taken their ideas, and every time we meet again for another meeting, he rolls out all the different pilots and ways he has implemented people's ideas, and he's starting to test them and put them in buses. And so it's, part of this is, it depends who the leader is. People ask me all the time, well, how do you guarantee they're going to do what they hear? The short answer is we don't guarantee it. We're not an advocacy organization. The only position we take is that decision makers should be in the room with everyday experts during the decision-making process. But there's some selection bias in terms of who's going to work with us. Because A, they have to take the time out of their day in the evenings. We don't do it for free. And there's power in hearing it in person. And so we have seen a lot of these institutions and just decision makers start to change what they're doing. Cincinnati Public Schools rolled out a totally new anti-bullying program last year after the project we did. And so it takes time, it happens slowly, but it is happening. So this is our main lesson, which is that if we've got a challenge that seems intractable, if you have things that don't seem to be moving the needle or aren't working, a lot of the answers or ideas will lie in people who are dealing with this every day. The example I use in Cincinnati all the time is that Procter & Gamble would never develop shampoo without talking to people and investing time and resources in learning from people who use shampoo. What should it feel like? What should the bottle look like? What should it smell like? How should it make your hair feel? And we should expect the same level of detail and the same level of attention from our public decision makers. And we should give them a way to do that easily and effectively. And so that's sort of what we have tried to do. And I'll pass it along. There's some pictures from some of these conversations.
Great presentation, Dani. Have a question for you.
Sure.
Yeah.
We can share the mic.
Yeah. When you bring one of these CEOs into your meetings to speak to people, have you had any experiences where you think that they're actually reciting a canned speech that really doesn't address people's concerns?
So there's no speeches.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually
That's good.
We've only allowed once a presentation to be made at the beginning, and it was because it was a really complicated insurance situation with sewer flooding, and that was a sort of unique one. But in general, the format is that we start with an icebreaker, an introduction. There's always food. So this is
That helps.
the other note that is worth noting on the organizing strategy of how to get people in the room. Just briefly, when we reach out to a bridge builder and say, hey, do you know someone who you want to invite? What happens next is they ask that person, hey, there's this thing, do you want to go to it? I think it's kind of cool. The person either says yes or no. If they say yes, the most common response, right, I'm sure that you get is, I'll ask around and let you know. That is not for us, that is not an acceptable answer. It's either no, I don't know anyone, or no, I won't ask around. But if you are willing to ask around, which is great, which is what we want, if the person is okay with it, we ask that you give us their name and their number if they say yes. Got to take the onus off of them, always. And so when we reach out to that name and number, we say, hey, Pastor Jones suggested that you might want to come to a conversation about affordable housing next week. We would love to have you there. Does it still work for you? And then we try and remove all the obvious barriers they might have to being there. So we provide transportation if they need it, childcare if they need it. There's always food, and we've had an interpreter in multiple of these conversations. So that doesn't solve every problem for everyone, but it has radically changed who is there. More than half the people who participate in our conversations say it's their first time ever in a public meeting or public forum. It's mostly people of color, it's mostly women. And if you look at the data on public meetings, the people who go to the mic are actually overwhelmingly, for people who've been to those meetings, this probably won't be that surprising, but are overwhelmingly older white men, property owners. And so it matters a lot that is not usually who's in the room for our conversations. We are changing sort of who gets to be in the room with CEOs and executive directors. But there's no speeches. We start by usually going through what people don't like, the problems they see. They can ask questions of the decision maker, but usually the decision maker speaks for between 10 and 20% of the time, and the everyday experts speak for about the rest.
Okay. I think you brought this up before, but I'll just bring it up again. How long has this been going on?
I moved back to Cincinnati in early 2017, and so it kind of got started I got a grant from the city manager's office that year through the Engage Cincy Challenge.
Yeah, I remember that.
So they give, those outrageously big checks. And that's how we got started.
First time I've been able to meet somebody who got one of those. Congratulations.
Thank you. I keep it as a kind of memento.
Thanks again.
Okay. All right, hello everyone. Again, my name is Mary DeLaney, and I'm with the organization Community Matters. If you're at all familiar with Cincinnati, we're in the Lower Price Hill community in Cincinnati. And I'm just going to share a bit about our organization and what we do. And just on the topic of community engagement and the intersection of that with community development, that's sort of where our organization found its roots, was in kind of uncovering a huge problem in our community, somewhat similar to Cohear uncovering this disconnect. In our neighborhood, the disconnect was that we've been a low-income neighborhood for a very long time, and we were only ever approached kind of in one way, and that was through kind of a service lens. You're a low-income neighborhood, you lack things, we can provide these things, or we'll help you with this, or we'll give this, or we'll volunteer. But it was never it was always kind of a one-sided approach to the neighborhood. And what had happened over time was really nothing changed. Services in and of themselves, have a good in that moment, but long-term, they don't actually change any of the dynamics in the community. And so our organization was sort of founded in this idea that what we were doing in our approach to community was segregating into sort of three different buckets. So you would have folks you engaged in social services. You would have folks you engaged as, kind of organizers or leaders or those sort of things. And then you would have folks that were doing community development of physical properties over here. Every once in a while, those would intersect, but for the most part, they were like these three separate things. So your community development folks were really focused on the buildings and maybe the use as well, but really focused on the buildings. And then social service folks over here, you were kind of, in our neighborhood in particular, writing off about 85% of the community as non-engaged citizens. In reality, however, if you just changed the approach, these folks are actually the drivers of our community and have made huge and amazing progress. So our work falls into these three buckets here, which is family sustainability, resident leadership, and then thriving community. I'll talk a little bit about those. So this is the idea of our organization, which is to combine those three approaches in our neighborhood. I don't know too much about, I must confess, I don't know too much about your community, so I can't really speak in terms of exactly how it applies, but I can say that in every community there are definitely folks that get segregated out as the recipients of social services and never engaged really through any other means. And so our work is just basically to kind of challenge that approach. These are just some of our programs, what the work actually ends up looking like, and I'll touch a little bit on those as I kind of give an overview. But because you all, of course, are interested in historic preservation, I thought I would also show you what we preserved. So a lot of our work kind of started because we were lucky enough to receive the opportunity to buy a historic campus, an old Catholic church campus. It was built in 1847 for $1. It was the best deal, except we couldn't really use it because you know how it goes. Didn't have heat, didn't have air conditioning, didn't have electric, didn't have, had a hole in the roof, all those different things. And so we were able to, we were able to preserve the campus through new market and historic tax credits and make a beautiful space. So this is called the Sanctuary, so it's no longer a Catholic church. And so we use it as a community center first. So we have all types of community events. And then we rent it out to help pay Duke Energy for the electric. And so this is just an example of a beautiful wedding that took place in the building. And so what we were just, early on we thought we were kind of dabbling in this space. I'll show you another picture here. we thought, wow, this is a beautiful building. We've done this amazing thing. We've saved this building. And very clearly from the neighborhood was like, that is great. We like this building. But the building itself isn't what we value. We would rather have a crappy building and investment in people than just a nice building and no investment in people. So this sort of drove us forward in developing the rest of our work. So what we do now is, in addition to, that's the kind of the community development piece of what we do, is we invest directly in residents as leaders. So I'll just give you a couple examples of different projects that we do. So the first one is the washing well. So this is a project that came from residents coming together and bringing up an issue that often we don't really very often think about in neighborhoods, which is, where do you do your laundry? In a lot of cases, if you have laundry at home, not really something you ever think about. If you have to go to the laundromat, you definitely think about it. And if you have no laundry facility in your neighborhood, it's a big part of your life. And so residents came together and said, hey, we're actually spending a huge amount of our money, a huge amount of our time just to do our laundry. And so we came together and started a social enterprise laundromat. So this model kind of highlights the intersection of community engagement, community development. So the obvious solution was a laundromat. And what we did was the nonprofit took on the financial risk of starting it up. And then residents run the day-to-day operations. And as we pay off all the debt on the business through the nonprofit, since we have more access to capital, then at the end of that period, which will be just a few years from now, we'll just transfer ownership over to the residents. So it wasn't that residents didn't have the idea, the expertise, the know-how to start the business. It's just they didn't have the access to the capital. And so through combining those three approaches, we were able to develop a different approach to building a business in the neighborhood. And if you're ever in Cincinnati, it's the best laundromat in the city. If you want to make a day trip and bring your laundry, that'd be fine too. And it's just a unique space in that, of course, it addressed the issue of accessing laundry, but it also is like a hub. It's where everything happens. Everybody meets there, connects, and so it's a huge opportunity for continuing engagement and gathering insights. Another example is of kind of the nonprofit organization getting out of the way is the Artist Collective. So this is a group of residents who came together who had these amazing creative skills that were just never invested in. And so this group of folks came and they have, over the past several years, completed hundreds of projects in the neighborhood, from murals to gatherings to all kinds of things. And what they've been able to do is get high levels of engagement from tons of kids, residents that are typically written off as not interested, not engaged. And this is a cool mural. This was a artist actually from California. He was on a road trip and he found us and said, hey, would you like a free mural? And we're like, sure. His name's Skywalker, if you want to look him up. So they've done all kinds of different projects. One that's really cool and again highlights different ways that engagement can happen. I will say this, engagement in our neighborhood very rarely happens in a meeting. Meetings we all kind of know how those go. It's just not usually where it happens. It happens in other ways. So this group, one really cool project that they did was we have 40% of the buildings in our neighborhood are vacant. And so they printed these giant banners that kind of mimic the hello, my name is sticker type design. And instead of saying hello, my name is, it said, I wish this was. and they hung those banners on vacant buildings all throughout the neighborhood with a marker. And people wrote on the banner what they wish that building was. And so we got tons of insights and feedback from folks that wouldn't have ever really been interested or had the time to come to a meeting, and gathered all those insights. This is a teen poetry night in the garden. We have a lot of really talented teen poets. And another example project is a pretty basic one. Everybody's pretty familiar with the model of community garden. And so our residents came together to develop a couple community gardens. But from that, again, this is another great example of engagement not happening in a meeting. The gardens are what led us to discover a pretty big issue in our neighborhood, something we knew about, but something we got to dive a lot further into, which is lead contamination. So what we found is that our soil, our homes, and our water all have high levels of lead. And through the gardens, as we did soil testing for the gardens, we were able to kind of highlight and uncover the issue there. And now we have a resident leadership group that's organizing around lead. They're going door to door to talk to families, do testing in the soil and the homes, because it's a pretty big concern. And then this is the latest one that's come out. We have a group of youth leaders. They've named themselves the Justice League. And they have come together, and we set aside about $10,000 of grant dollars that we were able to get so that they could, one, be paid as organizers, and two, have money to do projects. And so they come up with project ideas, and then they make those happen. And you want to know the very first project that the youth leaders wanted to do in the neighborhood? They were like, we need to get together and pick up trash. That was like their first one. And so again, the idea is like kids aren't engaged, they're not interested, they're part of the problem. But if you shift the power and put it on and give them that space and you step back, you'll discover that they just weren't engaged. There was no space for them. So this is, youth leaders, older teen leaders are engaged as mentors for younger kids. Oops. They have a ton of fun in the neighborhood. And now they've formed the Justice League, so now they're doing all kinds of organizing. And I will say, one of the issues that we face in our community is some small gang activity. And in the past several months, as the organizers have gone out, they have been able to get 4 teens who were engaged with the gang to join the Justice League. And so they're now organizing and engaging and bringing their ideas forward. Again, a group that we typically don't include in community development work, have absolutely brilliant ideas. And the last I'll share is just the neighborhood action team. And so this sort of came out of a lot of our work. This is just an organizing group of adults, and they came together to do a power mapping exercise initially to see who actually runs all the institutions and who owns all the property in our neighborhood. And so it's a very enlightening exercise. And what they found was that less than 5% of people who live in the neighborhood own any property in the neighborhood. 1 business in the neighborhood was run by someone who lives in the neighborhood. And 1 organization or institution in the neighborhood had residents in leadership positions or on the board. So we had virtually the people who are spending their time, energy, money, their lives in the community didn't actually hold any of the power in the institutions. And so they started organizing leadership training neighbor to neighbor and have, in the past 2 years, they got 3 seats on the, four seats on the community council of residents who are highly engaged and representative of the neighborhood. So this is Cynthia. She's our council president, our first ever person of color in that role, which is not at all representative of the community. Like, should have been a person of color if it was representative of the community for a long time. And she's been able to really bring community voice and engagement to the council. And then we have residents like Lisa here. She is going to be joining the local to school decision-making board for our school, because they didn't have any parents on the decision-making board before that actually lived in the community. And then some of the kiddos are forming a formal council for youth so that they can have influence in the neighborhood. And then there's folks like Kimmy here. She is one of 5 residents on our board of directors. So just kind of showing like folks that traditionally get overlooked as not interested, not engaged. Just a few years of organizing, and they're really highly engaged. And so this group, in addition to kind of flipping the power held in institutions, is also leading the way for 23 buildings to be, currently vacant buildings, to be renovated in the next 5 years. Our community is pretty small. 23 buildings is a pretty big deal. It actually reduces the vacancy and blight in kind of a core area of our neighborhood by 75%. And so it's huge. And so Kimmy, she's a great example. She's on the community council, she's on our board, and then this picture to the right here, that's her new home that's under construction right now. She's going to become a homeowner. So in addition to the 75% reduction in blight, they're also going to double the number of homeowners in the neighborhood in the next 5 years. All of these things in a traditional social service model wouldn't have really ever been discovered. We would have always just looked at what we didn't have. In a community development model, we might have gotten those outcomes for properties, but it wouldn't have this thread of residents who are also stepping up into leadership roles, who are now going to be owning businesses, running institutions, also then becoming homeowners. So we believe there's just this real power in breaking down the silos between those 3 approaches in community. And we've seen it just in a few short years of the approach. I'll leave you with the latest project that's really exciting that came out of the neighborhood action team. So you know we didn't have a laundromat, so you can guess we don't have a grocery store. And so the reason it's so important in our neighborhood, is that we're very geographically isolated. So I said our community name's Lower Price Hill. We're not super in love with the name, but we're at the bottom of Price Hill. It's not that we're low cost. I did get that question once. Although you can get a building pretty cheap. It's that we're at the bottom of this hill. So we're isolated. We're at the bottom of a hill, the river's to our southern border. We have a big industrial area to our eastern border. And so, not having a laundromat wouldn't be as huge of a deal if it was accessible somewhat easier by walking or even by taking a taxi or something like that. But having that giant hill, you have to go up the hill to get to the grocery store, the laundromat, all those things. So it is critical for us to have at least some of those things in our neighborhood. And so, of course, Cincinnati, we're in the land of Kroger, so we don't try to compete on the Kroger scale. There's no point. It's Kroger City. Don't try to have a grocery store at a Kroger scale in Kroger City. They will crush you. So our thought is, what if you remake the corner store model? Because we have a lot of those. And so we can't go full-scale grocery, but if we can remake the corner store model, then we can compete, because you can compete with corner store owners. And so the Neighborhood Action Team has been able to lead the way and are now in the process of developing a nonprofit corner store type model. So it'll be corner store plus your basic groceries, led by residents in a similar model to the washing well, where over time residents will be able to take ownership. So that's just a bit about us and how we approach community engagement and community development.
Yeah. Excellent presentation. That was inspiring. We have been following all the good things that have been going on in Lower Price Hill. And congratulations
Thanks.
on what you've achieved so far. I think you have a lot more to go.
We do.
Yes. And more good things are going to happen there. One thing I had a question about is, I was aware about the lead contamination problem in East Priceville. It's been a huge problem there for years because it's basically a brownfield, industrial neighborhood. How did you build the community gardens with contaminated soil? Was it replaced?
Yeah, good question.
Okay.
Yeah, so we had to remediate all the soils. So for community gardens, one, we transitioned to be a flower garden because it was just too far gone with heavy metals. And then the other, what we did was we were able to partner with the zoo and the Cincinnati Zoo, and they were able to bring in and do a barrier and then bring in all new soil. And so we were able to kind of remediate that way. And then we planted a lot of plants that pull some of those metals out. But we were able to grow food in raised beds with a barrier so that it wouldn't pull it. But honestly, it wasn't as much the food, it's that kids really like playing in dirt. And so the biggest concern is, you know, if anywhere in the neighborhood kids playing in dirt means they're getting lead, that's the bigger concern.
Yep.
And so we were able to do that, remediate that in the gardens, but we need a long-term strategy for what that looks like throughout the neighborhood.
One of the advantages that Lower Price Hill had when it embarked in this program of revitalization and community development was that fortuitously, many years ago, it was listed in the National Register. So it's a historic district, and almost all the buildings are contributing, which has opened the door to the use of preservation tax credits and other kinds of grants to be able to rehabilitate buildings. And we gave them an award for the renovation of the church building that you saw pictured in the slides. They did a beautiful job with that one. And also their public school, neighbors told me that CPS was actually planning to tear it down at one point, and that the tremendous outcry from the neighborhood saved the building. It's a beautiful 1930s Art Deco school that was designed by the city's leading architectural firm of Hannaford and Sons, and we were proud to give them an award for that also. And those buildings that are going to be renovated, are you working with Habitat on that program?
Yeah, we have two key partners. Habitat for Humanity is partnering with us to do historic rehabs. It's a little bit outside their norm. They prefer to do new builds because it's much more controlled. But because we were able to bring funding partners to the table, then they could afford to do that. And then for the other piece, we're partnering with an organization called Over the Rhine Community Housing, and we'll be utilizing historic tax credits for those as well.
Okay. OTRCH is another wonderful organization, and we have given them awards as well, and I imagine there'll probably be more in the future, maybe in Lower Price Hill.
Yeah.
Again, congratulations on all your good work. Now, those of you who are not familiar with Cincinnati, probably not familiar with the Price Hill neighborhood. Well, it's a fascinating community because, as Mary hinted around, it's actually 3 neighborhoods that are all adjoining and adjacent. And at the top of the hill is East Price Hill, which is a beautiful neighborhood. It's worth a visit if you've never been there. It was one of the communities that developed in Cincinnati in the 19th century because of transit improvements. And not just streetcars, they also had something else that was really cool. They had an inclined plane that brought the streetcars up the hill. So when they were constructed in the 1870s, there was a flurry of development at the top of the hill and near the incline sites, because people could work downtown or in other parts of the city and be able to ride the streetcar to get there without spending all day. So there's Lower Price Hill, there's East Price Hill, and then there's West Price Hill. And our third speaker today is very active in East Price Hill. Can you tell us about the cats?
You can't have community development without a safe, without a safe community. Whether it's perceived or reality, safety is critical to community development. As Mary stated, Price Hill has 3 sub-communities, Lower East and West. Cincinnati is kind of unique. There are actually 52 unique neighborhoods in Cincinnati. Price Hill makes up 3 of those. We have a lot of assets. We're only 5 minutes from downtown and all the major highways. We've got, we're economically and ethnically diverse. We have a host of religious institutions throughout the 3 neighborhoods, and we have education opportunities from pre-K to college, and all the residents have access to groceries, gas stations, some health and dental care, restaurants, entertainment options, and these are all within our borders. We don't have to leave the neighborhood to get to any of those. So I think that makes us pretty special. The Safety CAT's purpose is to improve the safety and livability and quality of life in Price Hill. Our mission is to work in concert with our residents, our businesses, and our law enforcement personnel to make that possible. And the organization is 100% volunteer. And I think that's what makes us special too, because the people that are active in this group do it because they have a passion for neighborhood. We came into existence following the tragic murder of a high school student after leaving a football game. It happened right across the street from the high school, and it happened in one of our business quarters. That was our call to action. We were founded in 2004 under Price Hill Wills, who is our redevelopment corporation's umbrella, and we became an independent organization in 2011. One of the first projects we undertook was working with the police department for the installation of security cameras along our business quarters. The police department was able to secure a Safe City grant, and those cameras cover all of our business areas. And the police department has a place called the Fusion Center, where if there is a crime, they're not monitored in real time, but they're all recorded. So if something would happen, they can go back to the recordings to see if they can identify the people involved. We were also formed while the collaborative agreement was active, and that afforded us a lot of training that we probably wouldn't have gotten normally. One of the aspects of the collaborative agreement was community problem-oriented policing. We do have a CPOP team, and we're still active today. And through our CPOP activities and training was provided by the police department and the Community Police Partnering Center to teach us about the crime triangle, the broken windows theory, and the Sarah problem-solving model. And these are all theories that we still utilize today. Broken window and blight contributes to more crime and more blight. That's the broken window theory. The crime triangle, there's 3 sides to the triangle: offender, victim, and place or opportunity. The theory is that if you disrupt any side of the triangle, you've disrupted the crime. And the Sarah is a problem-solving model that is employed to address, that we use to address crime and blight. Some of the the results of our problem solving, we have safety walks and litter pickups. We do a thing called good guy loitering to reclaim corners that have been taken over by people engaged in undesirable activity. We've hosted large street parties. We do large community cleanups. We have a court watch program, a juvenile diversion program, and we have a summer youth work program. And all of these in some aspect have used those theories I discussed to get the job done. Obviously, the safety walks and litter pickups address, those put a positive presence in places that have been marginalized. They're usually hotspots. They're prime examples of the broken window theory. We go in, we keep our eyes and ears open for activity that the police department might want to know about. We pick up litter and try to let the people that live there know that they haven't been forgotten. Good guy loitering is a way to disrupt problem activity on our corners. We bring our chairs, our coolers, and sit down for a Friday evening and disrupt the unwanted behavior, trying to reclaim those spaces for viable use. We try to engage the community in these cleanup efforts. Large-scale communities, all of Price Hill is about 7 square miles, so we can't do one cleanup and address the whole community. We can't really address the whole community in 2 cleanups with 7 square miles. But we can having 2 cleanups in the spring and fall, we can hit a pretty good portion of the neighborhoods in those cleanups. We've also hosted large street parties hoping to engage residents on some of the streets that have had a significant amount of problems, trying to strategize on ways to improve the livability of that particular street. And the police department is almost always in attendance at all of these events. They are a tremendous asset in all of this. We couldn't do what we do without them. We also have a court watch program. Basically what we're doing is, with the help of the police department, our probation department, we target repeat offenders who have victimized the neighborhood and our residents, asking for stiffer sentences. We're also trying to keep track of what those sentences are and share them with the neighborhood so that, we're informed when it comes to voting time. The neighborhood has had a significant problem with disorderly juveniles. And it's a very challenging problem because basically it's a revolving door. The juvenile courts in Hamilton County are overwhelmed, so they keep coming back and doing the same things over and over again. In our case, they were throwing rocks, vandalizing buildings, menacing people at our grocery stores, any number of undesirable activities, making people fearful to just go to the grocery store. So we had a series of community meetings And those meetings included residents, city officials, and county juvenile court officials. From those meetings, the diversion court was formed, and basically what it is, it's an opportunity for first-time nonviolent offenders to satisfy the court's requirements, and within 3 months of satisfying those requirements, they can have their records expunged. The good thing is, we've been statistically following it, and we haven't had any repeat offenders that the court they've been keeping track of it because we wouldn't see them. But we've been asking them for statistics, and they said the kids, the most part, the kids that have come through, they never see them again. So that's a big plus, trying to get these kids on the right road. And then one of my favorite programs is we've put these kids to work in the summer. We want to keep them off the corners. We want to keep them from doing things that they shouldn't be doing, possibly looking for ways to earn money that they shouldn't be looking to be engaged in. So we put them to work. One of the problems with Price Hill is during the 2008 recession, a lot of people lost their homes or they fled the neighborhood. So we've got a problem with overgrown lots. The city has torn some of the buildings down, but basically what's happened is it's replaced one problem with another, in that now we don't have a vacant building, we've got an overgrown lot. So we put these kids to work cutting these lots. It's hard to pick which ones to cut. So our theory is the lots in the most visible places get our attention for their hard work, and it is hard work. One of the people that works with me told me that never in his life has he cut a lawn that was 6 foot tall, and that's how tall it was. So we give them an allowance for helping us cut the lots. We're trying to teach them principles of respect. We try to reinforce the concept that there's nothing more important than education. We're trying to teach them pride in neighborhood. And overall, it's been very successful. And the side benefit of that is that it addresses neighborhood blight. And I guess in conclusion, everything we do, we try to do with sustainability in mind. The safety cat is on the street at least once every week, whether it's doing a safety walk, whether it's doing good guy loitering, cutting grass. We've been doing it since 2004. We continue to do it. We've made incremental progress, but I can tell you it's slow, especially when you've got 52 neighborhoods competing for city resources. The safety cat is not for the faint of heart. It's many of us. I'm a firm believer in the Nike swish. Just do it. Let's get it done. It leads to frustration in varying degrees because it doesn't move that way. So, but when we look back, we've made a lot of progress, so we just keep on keeping on. So that's what we are, who we are and what we do.
Stay up there. Got some questions for you.
Okay.
Great presentation. Very impressed by your work, and it is hard work. But I remember you saying that there were some other community action teams that were founded around the same time, but they didn't last. Can you tell me why you think that mattered? Was it because it lacked involvement by citizens?
I think that's part of it. This particular, and CAT stands for Community Action Team. Mm-hmm. This particular Community Action Team does have a significant amount of burnout because
I can understand that. It's frustrating.
It's frustrating, and we're really there's not a whole lot of fun sitting on corners, watching people engage in bad behaviors, calling the police department, and the other thing is, like everybody else, there's a very small, it doesn't matter what community action team it was, the number of residents engaged in the teams was small, and that led to burnout and eventually disengagement, which is unfortunate. The safety cat keeps going because I think we're bullheaded.
Well, good for you.
That's my Irish heritage.
Anybody have any questions for any of our great presenters?
Smaller properties, how did you make the tax credits work on some of those really small properties? Did you bundle them? Or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, all of our, aside from the campus, so the church campus was 5 buildings bundled together. And then the others, we had to bundle about 15 properties together to make it work.
And were you working with a local developer in that case so we could use the credits?
Yeah, so for our for the historic and new market tax credits, what we use for our campus, we had investment from Fifth Third Bank and Capital One Bank. Those were our investors, and then we worked with local developers to bring the project together. LISC, if you're familiar, was a big part of it.
They also benefited from assistance from Heritage Ohio, which is our statewide group. They were one of the people who they'd applied for that and won. It was very exciting when that happened.
It was.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious about the CAT. Are you a 501c3? How did you pay those kids?
We beg. We're not a 501c3.
That's honest.
We don't have the resources to pay for the lawyer fees and stuff. We are a 501c4. We beg a lot. We save aluminum cans. Anyway, we got businesses in the community that hold fundraisers for us. One of them is Skyline.
Skyline Chili, Cincinnati.
Yes, if you go to Skyline one day a month, they give us either 10 or 20% of the check as a way for us to raise money for what we're doing. And we've had a lot of good sponsors, Kroger's, Elder High School, and now Christ Cathedral Church in downtown Cincinnati just gave us a check for $2,000.
Oh, nice.
And those are the ways that we are paying the kids, and we have to be careful. I've learned the hard way. We have to be careful with terminology. We call it an allowance for the kids. That way, we're not talking about salaries or pay or anything like that. We give those kids an allowance for cutting that grass. And what we've done is we started out paying them $4 an hour, okay? I started doing some research on Rent-A-Kid, and Rent-A-Kid pays their kids $10 an hour. So eventually, because we got some additional funding, we started paying the kids $10 an hour, because they do work hard, because there isn't any block that they cut that's like a lawn. It's all, 12 inches, 16 inches, 6 foot tall. We're trying to teach them some skills while we're working with them. And one of those skills is trying to teach them to save. Just because you have it in your pocket doesn't mean you have to spend it. So if they save for every dollar they save through the program, we'll match with 50 cents. So they've got the opportunity to earn $15 an hour, but in the program is limited to 10 weeks. Otherwise, we just can't afford it. And I think of it as planting seeds. Most of the kids that are working with us are on the bubble. They could go either way. So we're trying to give them good role models so that they've all been told they run into any trouble, if they need to talk to somebody, there's 5 or 6 adults that they can come talk to. The kids some of them come from challenging home lives. Most of them come from single parent homes. So I told them, we want them to grow old too.
Yeah, it's a great program and all the benefits are very clear. I mean, that's wonderful. But liability always comes up in this too, so that's another thing I was curious about. How do you protect yourselves, protect your kids?
I carry an umbrella policy on myself because there is concern about that. I'm not too concerned about the program itself because you can't get blood out of a turnip, but I'm concerned about my personal liability. Safety is paramount when they're working because of that. And in 7 years that the program's been active, there's only been 1 kid hurt. And it didn't have anything to do with cutting grass, it was because they were horsing around.
Kids.
Okay. My heart skipped a little bit of a beat then, but the parent was very good about it. And some of the things I've learned have been so eye-opening. I go to bed every night thanking God I am blessed, okay? When I try to get a hold of, the first thing we do before we start the program every year, we get release forms signed. We get parental approval that they can use lawnmowers and weed whackers. And then we get contact phone numbers should something happen. Within 10 weeks, I found out that these contact phone numbers can change that quickly. So when I tried to get a hold of Mom to let her know that we were taking Anthony to the hospital because he had cut his hand, I couldn't get hold of her. So his brother was working with us, called another brother who was home, who called Mom, who met us at the hospital. We've learned a lot. The other thing we've learned is when you're dealing with teenagers, you almost have to have a one adult to 4 or 5 kid ratio. Otherwise, they just, all of a sudden you turn your back and you got 10 of the 20 standing over here talking. And you have a conversation with them. You can talk and work. If you can talk and work, you can do both. But if you can't do both of them together, you gotta be quiet. So, I mean, I've learned a lot.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to pose it anyway. What's the extent of a cooperation or collaboration between the CAT and the Community Council?
It's become, as it's grown, it's become more collaborative.
Great.
Each community council in the city probably has a gateway or some piece of property that needs to have maintenance done to it.
Mm-hmm.
So the community council has hired the summer kids to weed the gateway,
Great.
to mow the lots around the gateway, and that's true for both East and West Bryce Hill. I don't think Lower Bryce Hill really has mowing that needs to be done. So, I mean, they've discovered that there is a value to the summer youth work program to get yard work done.
Great, glad to hear that. Also wanted to mention, this is only partly related, but I wanted to mention it anyway. There are a lot of good things that are going on in Pattie's neighborhood, and one of them is a great preservation project. It's a former Masonic lodge on a street that was neglected. It had a very, very bad owner who did things to the building that never should have been done, like stripping off the copper and scrapping it and then blaming it on whatever. It now has a new owner. It is under renovation using historic tax credits, and it is going to be a real asset to the neighborhood in many different ways. Let's have a round of applause for these folks.
I'm just curious about one thing. If we come back next year and you're here, what do you want to tell us has happened or been achieved that you're working on now? Just curious what some of those things are. You come back and say, boy, that's front and center, something we want to have accomplished by then.
Sure. For us, it would be our nonprofit grocery store is up and running, and we receive our tax credit award for 23 buildings.
Yay.
No big deal.
Just 20.
I think for us, some of the biggest projects we've been working on are the countywide housing strategy. We've done a lot of the engagement around folks who are actually living the housing crisis. And so I'm tentatively hopeful that we'll develop a strategy that people can get behind that actually starts to address meaningfully that crisis. That's probably the one I'm rooting for the most.
And mine would be that we have to do less cleanup because our marginalized areas in Price Hill have been reduced.
Yeah, for all of you, I mean, I know nothing about this stuff, so 100% of what I learned, or I heard, I learned. But all three of you said, here's some of the lessons we learned, here's what we learned, blah, blah. And my question is anyone systematically kind of talking to you or talking to others to start making a list of these lessons learned so that the rest of us can benefit?
Great question, yeah. I don't know. I think there's some awareness in, and there's been some discussion around this self-segregating that happens in nonprofits of like community development over here, social service over here. But I don't think there's a systematic view of it yet.
Yeah, for us it depends on the nature of who we're working with. On the housing work, we've been very happy to have it be lessons learned for everyone, and have it be public. Duke Energy, they're a little more, they are eager to learn the lessons, but maybe less eager to share the lessons they've learned for various reasons. So it depends is the answer. I will say the one meta theme that we try and share is that across all of these different conversations, we have learned that often when we ask people, what's the answer, what would you do, regardless of the issue, the answers often comes back to some sort of human connection, some type of social capital, some type of mentoring or relationship. And so we have tried to share some of those lessons.
I think people have seen the successes that we've had, and they come and ask for help. There's nothing formalized about writing it down, but we share what we've learned. I mean, like I said, we learned the hard way, because when we started the summer program, there were 2 of us doing it, and we learned the hard way. Say I don't have any children. I learned the hard way that trying to supervise teenagers, you can't do it with that ratio. And that's what we share with people who also want to start something like this. Now, this past summer, we had 6 adults working with us. And this past summer was one of our most successful years, because not only did we get the grass cut, we were able to do some mentorship that got lost when there's fewer adults. And those are the kinds of things that we're sharing with other neighborhoods that might be interested. Our diversion court program, there are people interested in starting something like that, because one of the side benefits of that, some of the unruly kids in the neighborhood, that program, the neighborhood residents are intimately involved with the court sessions. So when the kids are on the street and they see a Pattie Hogan or they see somebody else that's been in court, it's kind of like antennas go up and say, oh, this probably isn't the right space to be misbehaving, because it's going to cost you. So those are the kinds, and we pass that on, because there are other communities that are trying to start a diversion court.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, panel.